And so, Sarah Palin was the last person I heard say this. So I thought, hey, it really fits here. So I wanted to know. In 1985, I read the book by Valene Tippett Avery and Linda King Newell, Emma Smith, Mormon Enigma, Emma Hale Smith. I read it out loud to my wife. And we were so disgusted. But here I was teaching seminary for the church full time at the time. So I did start looking for another job right then. Actually, I did. And so I thought, you know what? They could be lying. They could be lying. They could be making all this up. What if something was taken out of context? You know those anti-Mormons are liars, and they take stuff out of context, and they twist and they distort. And you know how members of other churches, you know, they make these little pamphlets that just try to make the church look ridiculous and just try to make Joseph Smith look bad and try to make us as members look stupid? I'll show them, the liars. Harvey, what's your mom's name?
Hazel.
He says Hazel Tilden didn't raise no dummies. So, Doris Clark didn't raise no dummies. Well, and then I decided to go out and prove it because I was a seminary teacher. After all, when you were in a Sunday school class and they got stumped, who was the expert? Kid, what do you think? You know, like I know anything, okay. and so I decided I'm going to expose the anti-Mormons. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to show them. So I started reading and reading and reading everything I could, and I decided I would come up with this list, a long list of anti-Mormon lies. I wanted to defend the church. And the more the more I got into it, I learned that Doris Clark raised a dummy. Dang it. But it was my brother Jimmy. So, no. I learned that the lies were not isolated incidents. They were not things taken out of context. They were consciously developed and used as a management tool when they became a little more sophisticated about it. It was a consistent practice, and it was calculated and premeditated. I learned that anti-Mormon literature, so-called, got it right most of the time. That those like William and Wilson Law and others who had confronted Joseph Smith about his dishonesty and deception, about his adultery, were excommunicated and branded as apostates and enemies to the faith, and that the church history, the official history, was rewritten or sanitized to make it appear like those were nothing but evil men and women who questioned Joseph Smith. And I learned that lying as an institutional practice did not end with Joseph Smith, that you can find examples of prevarication, lies, deception as a management tool in every decade since the church was organized. At some point, I was lucky enough to meet SpongeBob Square Garments, who operates the site Mormon Think, and his assistant Enigma and Diane Ormond. And I asked if this might be something that we could put up on the internet. I knew that Richard Packham had an excellent expose on lying, as did another site, Rethinking Mormonism. But I just wanted to put the list there. And so we worked through the list and corrected some of the errors and put it on. But when I was working for CES, it was tough because ethically I had a dilemma. Yes, I was looking for work because I thought I can't work for these people and and spin for them. I won't do it. So I would give measured doses of the truth from objective histories to my students at that point in the institute classes. And I kept getting into more and more and more trouble. Zone administrators were calling from Salt Lake on the phone. My area administrator was making special trips to drive down to Seattle just to see me. I felt so special. In one meeting that lasted 6 hours with 2 stake presidents and my area director, with stuff like, is it true that you told your institute students that you saw an R-rated movie? I said, yeah, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, and I think they're great movies and I think people ought to see them. And the guy sitting beside me, my area director, had been to see Unforgiven with me when we were at a church education symposium. I talked to him later and he said, he forgot. Yeah, so I was getting scalded, roasted, broiled, and turned over and over. Yeah, I had stripes on my back where I was getting. But then I asked him at one point during the roast, are you telling me to be dishonest with the students? Are those my marching orders? Just make it clear. We don't want you to undermine testimonies. Fine then. I have the truth and I have the sources and I can prove it's objective history. There's enough irrefutable evidence for most of, well, all of this stuff. What should I do about that? Don't quote that. Don't share it. That meeting was prompted because a 32-year-old law student had questions about blacks in the priesthood. And I had invited him in my office there at the Institute. I was his bishop. He didn't come to Institute. So, so he came down there to my office, and I gave him Lester Bush's article on the history of blacks in the priesthood. And we discussed it. And he thought, oh my gosh, this is so refreshing. It's so refreshing that, you know, I kind of know how this stuff all went down. He called his dad, and his dad immediately called his general authority friend in Salt Lake, who immediately called his zone administrator friend. And within 2 days, I had 2 zone administrators on the phone, and that's what led the meeting. So I wanted to know. And it was, don't undermine their testimonies, and okay, what about this? Don't teach it. But it's true. Don't utter a word. And so the message was clear. You will deceive if you want to keep your job. And you will spin it the way we tell you to and sanitize it if you want to keep your job. So I know a little bit about this deception thing. Now I want to say up front, Mormons are not the only group, only organization that deceives. I am well aware of that. Whether it's a secular or a religious organization, yes, individuals and the group as a whole sometimes sponsor deception. I understand that, but I'm not at an anti-Jehovah's Witness conference today, so we're going to focus on Mormonism. This is what the outline will follow. Joseph lied, and of course the superstitious believed. And I underscore that. It was the fringes of society, those that had their own little peepstones, those that had their rod that they would either set on the table and wait for it to move when they ask it a question, or hold it in their hand and use it as an aid to revelation. It was these people who were rodsmen and seers and who used peepstones that followed Smith, not the public as a whole. Smith legitimized and institutionalized lying as a management tool. We'll look at how he did that in some ways. 19th century leaders after Smith used lying as a management tool. And we'll take most of those examples from the battle against the Mormon Church and the federal government over theocracy and polygamy, because polygamy was an issue, but it was not the biggest issue. Really, the theocracy, the whole theocratic movement of Mormonism out in Utah, and their unwillingness to bend their will to the laws of the Constitution of the United States. And then current leaders continue the tradition. And finally, we'll look at some research on lying and what it tells us about what we probably, well, what we need to know.